Okay. Hi, everybody. Everyone is welcome to turn on the cameras. Thanks, Deej. Denj, look at that hair, buddy. Loving it. It's up. No pressure. If you don't want to turn, whoever wants to turn on the cameras are welcome to. And if you don't, and you just want to, hide behind anonymity, something like that, feel free. Okay, super. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background to the topic, resilience and grit, because I think it's definitely just, I guess, the thought and the idea behind the topic's been on my mind for a while. And the reason I think is fairly obvious. Just if we had to think about the difficulties, that the world's been going through, and many of us on a personal level, some of the challenges that we've been going through. And I think especially maybe for students, it would be uncertainty in terms of the future, in terms of job, am I going to be able to get a job? There's economic worries. There's, I know there potentially might be someone on the call who had to postpone their wedding, right? There's a fortune of challenges that have, I guess, just come to the fore over the last few months because of COVID. And one of the things that I've noticed, which is fascinating, is I learn, thank God, with a lot of amazing students. And just, I noticed that, people go through ups and downs. Myself, I go through ups and downs. And in the process over the last few months, I've gone through my own ups and downs. And what's fascinating to me is when you're in that down, when you're at the bottom, right? So what is it inside of a person that allows them to bounce back, right? What is it inside of you that allows you to really, just not stay there for long, because I think we'll see, there's a beautiful statement by Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, is that at tzaddik, shiva yipol tzaddik, a tzaddik falls 7 times. So it's a default setting that a good person in life, you fall, but v'kam means he gets up. So there's something inside of a human being, almost a definition of a good person is he falls, but he's able to get up. So that became really interesting to me. And one of the things that highlighted this for me was actually Rabbi Hanan. So Rabbi Hanan is a very sociable person, for those of you that know him, and he loves the human interaction. So out of most people, in a way, COVID probably presented one of the biggest challenges for him, because he didn't buy into the online system. He's not on social, like those kind of things it's just not second nature to him. And he feeds off other people's energies. So I just, watched initially when this all started to unfold, Rabbi Hanan, like the disbelief, and then he hit something inside of him, and at a certain point was able to rebound. And then I speak to many students who are unable to rebound. And they, for months, they've been in a constant and consistent down, and then you get people that are, like I said, more in that oscillating type of process. So I thought it was fascinating. Are we able to identify a character trait called grit or resilience? I'm not going to really differentiate between those two words. There's no real, there might be a modern day Hebrew word for it, but when you look at the Torah and different sources, there's no real word for that. In grit or resilience. Probably the closest that I could find was this verse by King Solomon in Mishlei, which shiva yipol tzaddik, a tzaddik falls 7 times, and he gets up. Okay, so I'm going to leave the definition of resilience and grit fairly broad, right? And we're going to come hopefully over the show. It's not, it's not, the focus here is not so much the definition, but rather the tools and the different things that I think are at the core of acquiring that character trait. Fine. So in order to do this, after thinking about this for a few weeks, I think it's important to make I'm going to highlight, I'm going to tell a few stories as well. But before we get there, I'm going to have to actually highlight this character trait. What is it when we say a person has resilience or grit? What actually is that? So I'll explain like this. Sometimes in life, when you're faced with a challenge, the primary way that we deal with that challenge is as follows. You're faced with a difficulty, and one of the ways, so almost like this wall, this brick wall that's in front of you, and it's tough, right? It's not easy to break through that wall. So the first line of defense for most human beings is to break down that wall. Really, it's not such a big wall. Now, how do we do that? What are the mechanisms through which we do that? So it could be, I'll just give an example, right? So we're in lockdown, and all the Sydney people will excuse me for using this example a number of times over, but it's at the front of mind for some of us. So the lockdown, it's a wall, and it's difficult, and you've got, you know, a myriad of different challenges to deal with. So one of the things, when you reach a low point, you start saying, well, actually, look what I do have. I've got a beautiful family. I've got a beautiful wife. I've got children. I've got, you know, I've got a job. I've got, you know, and then people start comparing. There are other people out there that are in a much worse off situation. And, you know, I heard this story and this story, and this person, God forbid, got, you know, and we in Australia. And if you look at Australia, it's horrible to be in this lockdown, but relative to America, you know, if you look at how many people have died, and we're quite privileged to be in the situation, and maybe lockdown's not so bad. So what am I doing? And I'm not saying this is something we shouldn't do. In fact, maybe it is something. You exercising your character trait of appreciation and perspective, and all of these things. What they do is they minimize the challenge. It's not as bad as I thought, right? Now, what I would like to focus on today is not that, right? What I want to focus on is we're not going to be doing that. We're not minimizing the challenge. On the contrary, with all your appreciation of all the amazing things you have in your life, there's still a massive brick wall in front of you, right? And it doesn't seem to be getting any smaller. On the contrary, it's growing and growing and growing. So now what? Now what do you do? How does one deal with that situation when there's a brick wall? That's where a person needs resilience. That's where, and the reason why I'm saying is I think it just highlights what we're really focusing on. Jordy, does that make sense? Just picking on you because I can, you know. Anyone with cameras, it's brave, you know. You're bound to get picked on. Fine, but that was really the idea behind it. I thought we could maybe structure this so we can focus on what I would like to focus on. Now, the way I'm going to break this down is I'm really only going to focus on two core things, because there are many. When you look online, so I went online and I had a look around, you know, contemporary psychologists, and, you know, how does one deal with resilience and grit? And lots of people have, you know, different ways of defining things, and, you know, you have to be positive, or you have to have a growth mindset, or you have to, you know, so there's lots of different ways. I've distilled it down. This is for me through a process of definitely working on this topic over a few weeks. I might have, in the sake of honesty, not have realized that I was speaking tonight. I can see Darren Resnick he's actually meant to be speaking this week in my head. So I found out today, a few hours ago, that I was speaking. So the reason why I'm sharing that with you is number one, to show you a real life example of resilience, right? When I realized that I'm speaking in a few hours. But the truth is, this topic, and Benji Feynman can vouch for me, I've been kind of thinking about it for a while. Am I right, Benj? A few weeks ago, we linked together, and I kind of brought it up. And it's been on my mind, and I actually, you'll see by the end, I took on a few things over the last few weeks to try open up the concept, and I'm going to hopefully share that towards the end, right? So the two main things that I've seen in my own life, right? The first one we're going to focus on is based on something from one of my favorite books in the world, which is Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. If you haven't read it, so you are committing a grave sin. And I don't know if God will forgive you until you read this book. So you have to read it, because it's incredible book. So he says as follows. In the first part of the book is he developed a theory called logotherapy, which means meaning therapy, right? And he developed, what's so unique about it is he developed it in Auschwitz, right? Which really does give it, I think, a lot of credence and weight, because, you know, he was in theory, not theory, I don't know, one of the worst places that has ever existed in mankind's history. And he was able to develop logotherapy, means meaning therapy, right? It was a way or mechanism of coping with what he was going through. So he writes, which is fascinating, the turning point for him in Auschwitz was he was trading a cigarette for a bowl of soup, or deciding whether or not he should trade the cigarette for a bowl of soup. And there was like this whole system of like a decision tree that he had to go through, whether or not he was going to trade the cigarette. Why? Because there was a capo or like a foreman. He was quite sadistic, and he might need it for there, but his energy levels was really low, so maybe he needed it for now. And he was like going through this thought process, and he just realized that his whole life had become so low, for lack of a better word, right? Which was really what the purpose of the camps in a way was to destroy a person's vision of a future, of something bigger, better, right, or brighter. That was really the point, was to do that. So he actually realized within himself, the way he writes it, he was disgusted. I wrote it down here. It says he grew disgusted with his meaningless life. And he realized if he was going to survive, he needed to rediscover the purpose to his existence. Right? That's what he chapped. So how did he do that? He began picturing what he would do when he left. So he pictured himself delivering these amazing lectures in Vienna, which was the head of the school of psychiatry or psychology. And he pictured himself delivering these amazing talks in Vienna. And what he slowly started to realize, it started to clear his mind, and he could see the world for what it was. And he started to get back what we would call a cheshek, a desire, right? A desire to live, right? And a desire to respond and survive and deal with the situation in creative ways. And he started to see the people around him for the first time. He could start helping people. So quite fascinating. What exactly changed? So I'm going to share two stories with you. One I do not think is true. One I do think is true. The reason why I would share a fairy tale with you, it's not a fairy tale, but a story that's not true, is because I think the message is very profound. So let's call it more of an analogy. Like every good story. So story number one, like every good story, it starts with a guy or a girl, but we're going to use a guy for the story. And the guy is, he works on a train line. So what's his job? So imagine you've got this train line going through the outback of Australia, and you can imagine that there's massive gaps between one train stop and the next. His job was to jump on the train and clean it. And that was his job. So he would clean it. It was boiling hot. It was the middle of summer. He'd get onto the train. He'd go compartment by compartment. A lot of them were holding lots of different goods, and his job was to go on and check that everything was all right. And if anything had spilled, he cleans it up. A lot of it was freezers and cold rooms and things like that. Now, just to give you a little bit more of an insight into our guy, the guy was not such a wonderful person, right? He was one of those, let's call him Mr. Gloom and Doom. So, when his kids would come to him and say, Dad, can we go to the footy tonight? He would say, no, it's going to rain. And they were like, okay, can we go to the movies? No, there's no good movies on. And if you say, we go to the restaurant, the restaurant, last time we went, the food was terrible. That type of very, very negative type of person. So what happens? He's in the middle of cleaning. He's in his shorts and his t-shirt, and it's boiling hot. And he goes into one of the freezer rooms, and he's cleaning the freezer room. And obviously, the way he does it is he wedges open the door with a little something to hold it open. And while he's cleaning, his worst nightmare occurs. What's his worst nightmare? Something slips, and he hears the door sliding shut, and now it's closed. And now he starts realizing there's no way of opening it from the inside, right? You can only open it from the outside. So he starts sweating and realizing that there's no way out. He's banging, shouting, no one comes, and the train starts taking off. And he knows that it's a good 35 hours to the next stop, and he's in a freezer, and there's no way of surviving. So he takes out a piece of paper. It was before the advent of phones, and he starts writing down his last will and testament. So he writes the following. He says, by the time you find me, I will have died of hypothermic shock or whatever it might be. I'm going to be dead. And I just want to write a few messages to my children. He starts writing, as I always told you, I always knew I was going to die through some freak accident, some crazy turn of events. And he says, this is it. And he starts detailing all his advice for his children. You know, life's really hard, and the best that you can do is try avoid as many negative situations as possible. And he starts listing all the negative things that have happened and how you could, you know, guard for it. And fine. After 35 hours, the train comes to a stop, and they're pulling out all the whatever wares that they're taking out of all the different freezers and fridges, and they find this guy on the floor. He's in a coma, and they find his letter, and it says, you know, died of hypothermic shock. And the doctors come, and the engineers come, and everyone's like trying to, you know, they're trying to work out what happened. And he's taken to hospital. He's in a coma, and the engineer, you know, he says he uncovers a fascinating thing. The freezer room, the freezer mechanism actually broke. Right, so all it was a very cold fridge. It was not the type of thing that could actually have caused someone to go into hypothermic shock. Right, it was just cold. Now, how does that work? Right? How does it work that a person is not really going to freeze to death, but his belief system is so powerful, right? He believes this is his reality. And since this becomes his reality, his physical being follows suit. Right, so that's the fairy tale story that I don't know if it's true or not. I heard it from someone. Right, I can't verify that it's true or not. It might not be true, might be true, but I think the point is apt. But what I am going to show you is a story in the opposite direction that I do know is true. Okay, the story goes as follows. There was a doctor, and he worked in an oncology ward. Okay, and the doctor worked in the oncology ward, and he worked with teenagers and young, you know, like from the age of like 10 up until 20. That was his speciality. And the way it worked is, you know, he would go through the ward, and he'd meet with different people that were going through whatever they were going through. And after each person that he would meet, he would write down a list together with the nurse. He'd dictate to them, you know, how their vital signs were, you know, are they doing okay? Are they improving? Sometimes, unfortunately, you know, he would make a note that someone, you know, was potentially going to pass away very soon, and they needed to speak to the family or needed to make them more comfortable. So the story goes as follows. The one day, he walks into this, you know, he's in a particular room, and the patients are being brought to him, right, just to speed up the process. And he sees this boy who walks in, you know, he's 17, and he's quite boisterous, and he's a very positive boy. He's quite strong, well built, you know, and he's very upbeat. And he looks at his vital signs, and he looks at the different results, and he goes through it, and he does a few tests. And, you know, the boy walks out afterwards, and he says to the nurse, no, tick, 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 amazing, amazing. He's coming so far. His red cells, blood cells, everything's amazing. And I think he's going to survive. As he says that, unbeknownst to him, there was a boy standing outside listening to the conversation. Okay, now this boy was a 14-year-old boy, quite skinny, and he was suffering a lot. Right? He had not responded well to the meds. And he comes in, he overhears this conversation. He comes in, and the doctor, you know, he goes through whatever he goes through with him. He ticks off all the boxes, and he walks out, this boy, and he says to the nurse, it's not good news, right? His blood cells, things are not going well. And he turns, the nurse and him are discussing this, and they're going to speak to the family. Fine. That's the end of this. That's part number one. Jump 20 years into the future. And this particular doctor happens to be at a wedding. And by that stage, this 14-year-old boy had become a man. And he comes up to the doctor, and he says, listen, I want to tell you something. You probably don't remember me, but he tells the doctor the story, right? And he says, you know, the problem was every person that interacted with me, he said, I looked at my mother's eyes. She knew that I was dead. And my brother and my father, and there was no one in the world that believed in me. He said, but the one day, he said, I came for a checkup, and I was sure I was going to die. He said, and I heard you talking about my case, and you told me how I was boisterous, and the bloods that came back well, and I was strong, and I was going to be okay. And he said, for the first time in months, I realized that I was actually going to be okay. He said, and that's what pulled me through it. Now, the doctor never turned around to him and said, well, actually, you know, I was speaking about the guy before you, right? But the doctor who tells the story over, he said that this was, you know, for him, this was eye-opening, because he didn't even remember exactly what happened or how the boy, he didn't know what the cause of the boy improving was, but he said in a million years he would never have thought this boy would improve. So I think these two stories, when you take them together, teach us something unbelievable, right? That a person's belief system, when a person truly believes in something, that defines his reality, right? That defines his reality, and it has a tremendous effect on a person's physical well-being. And I don't think we put enough effort in, or emphasis on that, right? In our world, our belief system, our value system, we look at it as, it's not the primary thing. It's a nice thing. It's an additive, in terms of, if we have to describe our own learning and our own growth and our own picture of what's right or what's wrong, our value system, what drives us, those things are nice things to have, but it's not the main thing. The main thing is a degree and a business and there's so many other things that we elevate on top of purpose and meaning, and that I think if we were to flip it on its head and look at it in a completely different way, our resilience would skyrocket. Because if I look at my own life, when I'm going through something which is exceptionally difficult, it's my belief system, it's the vision that I have for my life that really drives me. And I'm going to share a beautiful Mishnah with you. There's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin. Just before I continue, can everyone hear me okay? Is it perfectly clear? The line? Yeah? No.
Rav, can I ask a question?
Yes, Jody.
Like you said that we don't put enough of an emphasis on those things, but I think that we actually do, but I think that we do it in the wrong way, and that we tell ourselves things, or I know me, sometimes I tell myself things that maybe aren't necessarily good about myself, and then I start to believe them, and then it kind of manifests into my life. So I think, in my opinion, a lot of people do actually do it, but they're doing it the wrong way, or they're doing it in a way that's detrimental to themselves. That's all.
Okay, it's a good point. So let me say it a little bit differently. I think you're right. People naturally have certain desires or a nature. That nature, if you're not working against the grain, it will pull you in a certain direction. Maybe that's more what you mean. So the default setting for a person is just it's almost like you have I wouldn't say a purpose or a meaning, but it's like there's a negative bent to it, right? Where if you're not actively trying to create a different narrative or a different picture or a different purpose for yourself, right? So the picture that's created, like you're saying, is often built on what I would call dimion. It's not real, right? It's not really you, but because of your a negative character trait, potentially, you create a picture that's not true. I think that's a great point. So I'd like to share a Mishnah in Sanhedrin that I think just has an interesting approach from a little bit of a Torah approach to this concept of a vision that a person is meant to have for themselves. So the Mishnah is dealing with an interesting question. It's one of my favorite Mishnayot, and I don't know if maybe you've heard me quote it before, but the Mishnah basically says like this. Asks a fascinating question. When Adam, so the Jewish narrative of how the world was created, Adam, the first man, was created alone. So the Mishnah asked the following question: why was it that man was created alone, on his own? Why couldn't, Hashem, when He creating the world, why couldn't He create lots of human beings all at once? That's the question. So the Mishnah answers in the following fascinating way. It says like this. When a human being creates something like a mint, right? We're talking about a coin and a mint. So you have like a machine that creates a coin, and it has a particular image that you stamp in the coin. Now what happens when you stamp the coin? Each coin comes out identical to every other coin, right? That's how mints work. So there's no differentiation in it. But if you think about it, if we all descended from one single human being, one thing we can say about that human being was he was completely and utterly unique, right? He was an individual. Why? Because there was no one else there. Now, the human beings that you would think would come out of that human being, that original human being, each one would be identical to the other, right? That's what you would have thought. But we see something fascinating. Every human being is completely and utterly different to every other human being in the world. Right, so if I can pick on Jakey Jones for a moment, right? Jakey, the rule is if you have your camera on, you get picked on, right? If we pick on Jakey Jones, so Thank God there's only one Jakey Jones in the world. But the truth is that there will only ever be one Jakey Jones in the world. So from the beginning of time till today, there was never another human being exactly like you, Jakey. And if we take it one step further, and we extrapolate to the end of time, you know, let's say thousands and thousands and thousands of, however long it takes, there will never be another Jakey Jones, ever, right? With the same mix of not only physical being, but the mix of character traits and the amazing positive attributes and deficiencies and lackings, that whole mix that makes up Jakey Jones, there will never be another one, ever. So the Mishnah says, how do we know this? Saying, because that is why man was created. Hashem could have created many human beings. Why did he create us as one? To teach us this message, that no matter how many human beings would ever populate the world, every single human being shares in that unique character trait that Adam, the first man, had, that he was completely unique. To the extent, that's what the Mishnah says, a person is obligated to say, you have an obligation to say that Bishvili Nivra Olam, the whole world was created for me. Right? That's what the Mishnah says. Quite a beautiful idea. Now, to the extent that a person has that belief system, you have a belief system that you have a meaningful existence, and you have a belief system that you are unique in that meaningful belief system, and that you have something unique to offer the world. Now, I do believe, right, so the Rav Hanan is currently learning a book called Path of the Just. The way the Path of the Just starts off, it says a person has to know if the beginning of any spiritual endeavor, anything a person does in this world, you have to know why you're here. And he says if a person doesn't understand his own obligation, his own unique world, ma chovato ba'olamo is the way he says it, so you're done. It's very hard, right, to have, if without direction, if a person doesn't have a direction, right, so then of course the winds and the winds and the currents of the world around us will shift us and move us. We happen to have lived in a world that I think had been, you know, definitely in my lifetime had been fairly, even though there were wars and things, they were much more distant. You know, there was a Gulf War, there was this war, there was, even when I lived in Israel and I lived through, you know, different challenging times for the Jewish people, but I was in Jerusalem, you know, and I felt it never affected my life to this extent, to what we're going through right now, you know, with this pandemic. It has a tremendous effect on everyone in so many different ways, right? And when the currents of life are not consistent, and it can really blow us off course unless we have a very strong understanding of where we're going. Now, that was part one, right? So we'll call that part one is purpose, belief, meaning. And I'm leaving it particularly vague because there is a lot to say within that. And I want to carry on because I think, and hopefully on Thursday, we're going to go more and more into that part A. Part B is something that I think is also a very important point that we miss when it comes to this idea of resilience. Is I think resilience is a muscle to be exercised. It's not something, often when I learn with students and I ask them, like, why are you down, or why are you up, or people just think it's just, that's the way I am. Either I respond, you know, when something negative happens, I respond, or I don't. It's just who I am. I think not like that, and I'm going to share something with you, hopefully that will try illustrate the point. So it's as follows. If I had to share for me what's been personally challenging during the last few months, okay? Now, many of you might not be able to relate to this, but I'll share it anyway and hopefully create a picture that you can understand and connect to in your own way. And you'd have to create your own picture of what you've been through. So for me, my life up and before lockdown I was exceptionally busy outside of the house, right? I for sure had my hour and a half, 2 hours every day where I'd spend time with my kids, maybe in the morning a bit and in the afternoon after work. And, you know, but my life was exceptionally busy. Out early in the morning, I had my chavrusas, my learning, my davening, come back, you know, a little bit of breakfast with the kids or whatever it is, maybe take them to school 2 or 3 times a week. And then, you know, I'm into my work day, I'm learning with students, I come back home, it's a quick dinner, it's a quick engagement with the kids, and then I'm out the house again, right? And I'm running things for Awesome or whatever it might be. And then, there's the classic date night where Cara and I generally would go out once a week. So my life was exceptionally busy. All of a sudden, so there's a lockdown that's lasted almost since March. And now I have to engage with my kids, but I have to engage with my kids all the time. Not sometimes, all the time. And my kids, it's just a different, I just didn't know this is what happened in our home. I didn't realize that this is what actually goes on, because I was never there long enough. And I always had the resilience and the ability when things weren't going my way to keep calm, because it was an hour or 2 hours in the day. It was very seldom that I would lose my cool and I couldn't control something. But then all of a sudden you have this crazy world where you can't escape. And it's all the time. And the kids, and my kids, thank God, they're wonderful kids, but they're kids. Right, and they each have their own needs, and they each have their own challenges, and each one have their own insecurities. And this one's dealing with a friend, an issue with friends, and he doesn't feel comfortable with his friends. And this one's dealing with a physical issue, and this one's dealing with, and they're shouting and they're screaming, and it's like how do you deal with that? And you try to control it, and you see things about yourself that you never thought existed. Right now, definitely I just didn't, for me, it was very challenging to realize there was a whole part of myself I just didn't know. And that in itself was very depressing, because I thought I knew myself pretty well. I learn a lot. I do a lot of self-introspection. So it was very, very challenging for me on a personal level to realize, no, you actually have no idea who you are. And you actually, you think you're able to, and you teach people about how to cope with things, and you can't cope with this. What's going on? So that's where this idea of resilience, I realized one thing I did realize about myself was the following. I had a very clear picture of what I thought I was meant to be doing with my life. And I had a very clear picture, thank God, and this was based a lot on my Torah values, of how I was meant to engage with my family. And so it created a very strong picture of where I was meant to be. So I could see that where I wasn't the ideal. Right. So now that's, I think, step number one, which is why I think that first part that we went through, which was the purpose and the meaning and the belief, is so important, because it creates a picture of where you're meant to be. Often for many of us, the reason why we lack resilience is because we've got nowhere to be. So we've got nowhere to be. So it doesn't really matter whether I flake or I don't flake now. Right. So I knew very clearly where I had to be, but I wasn't there. So one of the things that I realized was it's actually a muscle. Right. And that muscle, I'd never exercised it before in that particular way. So how do you start exercising that muscle? So I'll just give you an idea of one area which actually had a massive impact on this other area with my kids. One of the things I noticed, right, where I was unable to engage with was it's when there's a constant pull on a person, right? There's a constant pull that I want X and the world's not giving me X. So that if it's for a little bit here, there, but when it's constant, it's very difficult to deal with. So one of the things I took on was I decided to change my eating habits quite significantly after the last two weeks, whatever it was. And what I noticed was that the eating, it wasn't to lose weight, right? It had nothing to do with losing weight. It had everything to do with, I wanted to experience that feeling of whatever you want to call it, a dopamine rush, right? You want that food, and that feeling of just not engaging with it, that constant exercising of just not engaging with it and sitting with that feeling. You experience it, you sit with it, but you don't engage, right? You don't go with that feeling. And just thinking about how does that make me feel, right? So on Thursday night last week, everyone ordered these massive hamburgers, and it was really fun. Everyone got what they wanted, and I had a little bit of fish. Not that there's nothing wrong with fish, but relative to a delicious hamburger from Tonelli's, if you've ever had it, so fish is not it's not the number one. But the point was, I started to see that constant, and suddenly after a few weeks, the pull for the food suddenly diminishes. And what I saw was that it had a massive knock-on effect in other areas of my life as well, where you start to build a muscle where when your kids are making a noise and fighting and this and that, I'm in a meeting, and I can deal with that 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6, and then 7, by the 20th time, so there, my resilience level is not there. right? So I might lose it. But I started to see I could push it further and further and further and further and further. So I noticed, what I think, my theory is that it's really a muscle that you can exercise. It's not either you have it or either you don't have it. I think it's something that you can actually exercise. And I think, just to end off, I'll end off with this before, if anyone has any questions. I think one of the areas that also helped definitely for me was cutting down on the negative influences around me. And what I mean by that is news, right? So the Chofetz Chaim wrote a book on Lashon Hara. And one of the famous statements in Tehillim is, Mia Isha Chofetz Chaim, who is a person, the reason why I call his name was actually Rav Yisrael Meir Kagan, related to Ryan Kagan, potentially, right? So he was a very famous rabbi, and he named his book, it was about Lashon Hara, he named it Chofetz Chaim, which means a person who desires life. It's based on a verse in Tehillim, and it says, Mia Isha Chofetz Chaim, who is a person who desires life? A person who guards his tongue from speaking evil. Now, is it some like freaky thing that when you guard your tongue from speaking evil, suddenly you have a long life, you live a long life? So I don't think it works like that. The way I think it works is that when a person surrounds himself with negativity, right, so that has an effect on who you are. When your picture of the world is bleak, right, so it takes away a person's ability, I think, to be resilient. And I think if you just go on CNN, I did it just before I came on, I haven't done it for so long, just to look at the news headlines, and it's like you read it and you just think, I live in the bleakest, darkest world, right? And you just like, you don't want, I when just reading it, and it's not, and I know most of the people, most people have, it's not just, the news, it's Twitter and it's this, and there's so many negative impacts and influences around us. A big part of why we lack resilience, I think, is because we live in a bleak world often. And now I'm not saying that a person should ignore the world and that there are difficulties that we're going through, but I think the bombardment that we go through, it has a lot to do with our lack of resilience, right? When you live in a bleak world, a purposeless, that's how connected, I think, to the first part that we dealt with. When a person lives in that world, that there's so many negative points and so much bleakness and so it's hard to see that we live in a meaningful, beautiful, purposeful world. Well, it's like you might say it, but that constant, it's almost like that muscle, the same way I was trying to build up a muscle of resilience, it's the opposite. It's like kind of like what Jordy was saying before. It's the world has all these influences that just create this natural default setting for us. If you're not swimming against the stream, you're not going to be able to create that meaningful picture of how you actually are and should be and want to be. You'll take the world's picture of the world and CNN's picture of the world, or Fox News, or, and they're coming with all their own biases and their own, political agendas. And you suddenly fall prey to that whole experience. So I think if I could, just to summarize very, very quickly, kind of the journey that we went on, I was hoping just to open up this sugya, this idea, the concept of resilience and grit, and where does it come from? The first point that I think I was trying to make was, if a person lives a purposeful, meaning existence, right, and you have a goal, a clear goal of where you're heading to, and you understand your own uniqueness in that process. So that's number one. I think the foundation of resilience and grit, that's number one. And number two is, I think the main point, the second main point is that it's not something that just happens automatically. It's not either you have it or you don't. I think it's very possible to work on it, either on the positive angle by trying to do things to acquire it, or on the negative side by trying to, as much as possible, cut off some of the negative influences that surround us. I think that's the end. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to ask. Emma, thanks for the hands, the clapping. It's much appreciated. But yeah, those are my thoughts. And on Thursday, what we're hopefully going to be doing is, if you look, some of you might have, you've got we put a little bit of a booklet together for these series, and there's some practical exercises that I put in there that basically, I think, will kind of focus you on trying to uncover some of the things that we've discovered tonight. And if you would like that little booklet with some of the worksheets just leading up to Thursday night, please feel free to give me a buzz and I can send it to you. And if not, you should all have a beautiful week. Any questions? None? Easy.
Well, I've got one.
Yes, Jakey.
You spoke about how you go on this like eating, like resilience from eating, and you said that to exercise your muscle. Is that correct, or am I misrepresenting your words?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
If there's no further purpose to the resilience, like is that worth it, or is that a worthwhile experience? And I say that because you can go in a loop of continuing to push yourself to every nth degree of resilience until there's like, I guess, you refrain from absolutely every luxury or every enjoyment you could have.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a positive necessarily. I don't think a person's meant to do that. And also I think most of us, if we tried to do that, we would break, right? I don't think we meant to exist in that way. A person has to know it was one small area, right, that I was just testing out. A person always has to be really careful when you take on things, right? This thing I didn't take on forever. It was 3-4 weeks. That's all, and then we'll reevaluate. But yeah, is your question, is there a purpose in trying to cut down on physical? I'm not 100% clear on the question.
Because you said that it's not because you wanted to lose weight, or there was no end goal, I guess, more than just for the sake of exercising this muscle. So yes. I guess my question is that really a worthwhile exercise if it's not for an end goal of building that resilience?
Okay. I think there would be many different reasons why a person might do it, right? So I think as long as you've got a well thought out reason, I think it makes sense. It makes sense why you would do that. It could be that a person wants to lose weight because they feel self-conscious, or they're this, or a person could be like in in lockdown. Overeating is it's a big issue. So if you're not exercising that much, it's a good area to cut down on a little bit of a bit of chocolate, a bit of something. There's definitely different reasons why a person might take that on. Why I took it, I had my own cheshbon, my own process of why I did it. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but okay. All right, thank you everybody. Have a beautiful, beautiful evening. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you all have a beautiful week of trying to uncover a little bit of purpose and existence, and hopefully you increase your resilience.
Thanks, Rav.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Laila tov, everybody.
Cheers, Rob.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers, Tiff. Cheers, Jem.
Thanks, Ev.
Ben. Oh, good man. Levi stayed to the end. Hey, Ter. Thank God.